There's a moment, and you'll know it when it comes, when you're standing in front of the mirror and the person looking back doesn't quite match the one you've been carrying around in your mind. Not because you've changed physically, but because something underneath has shifted. Something you've been ignoring for so long that it's carved out a hollow space inside you. And in that hollow space, there's a question you can no longer avoid. When did I stop being mine? It doesn't announce itself with thunder. It arrives in the quiet, after another conversation where you said the thing you thought you should say instead of what you actually felt. After another evening spent performing a version of yourself that requires so much energy you're left depleted, wondering why connection feels like labor. After waking up in a life that looks perfectly fine from the outside, yet feels like you're living behind glass. This is the strange arithmetic of self-abandonment. You give pieces of yourself away so gradually that you don't notice the disappearance. A preference here, a boundary there, a dream folded up and tucked away because it didn't fit someone else's idea of who you should be. You learn to translate yourself into a language others can accept. You become fluent in the art of accommodation, and in doing so, you become a stranger to your own pulse. The cost isn't dramatic. That's what makes it so insidious. It's the way you say yes when your entire body is whispering no. The way you laugh at jokes that don't strike you as funny, agree to plans that drain you, defend choices you don't actually believe in. It's the slow accumulation of small betrayals, so small you can rationalize each one. It's just this once. It doesn't really matter. It's easier this way. But the body keeps score. And eventually, beneath the surface of your carefully maintained composure, something begins to rot. You might call it resentment, but it's deeper than that. It's the grief of watching yourself disappear while everyone around you insists you're doing fine. Better than fine, you're good, reliable, easy to be around. You've made yourself so easy to love by becoming so hard to know. And here's the terrible paradox. The more you abandon yourself for others, the less they actually see you. They see the role you're playing, the accommodating friend, the selfless partner, the person who never rocks the boat. They grow comfortable with this version, and why wouldn't they? You've trained them to expect it. You've made it clear, through 1,000 small concessions, that your needs are negotiable. Meanwhile, something inside you is starving. You start to feel it in strange ways. A restlessness that has no clear object. A numbness that settles over experiences that should move you. You watch yourself go through the motions, laughing, agreeing, showing up, and there's a peculiar distance to it all, like you're observing your life through a telescope. Present but not here. Alive but not living. The emptiness doesn't announce itself. It seeps in through the cracks of all the things you've said yes to when you meant no. All the times you've swallowed your truth to keep the peace. All the moments you've contorted yourself into shapes that fit other people's comfort zones. And then, beneath that emptiness, if you're quiet enough to hear it, rage. Not the loud, explosive kind. The quiet kind. The kind that lives in your chest like a stone. Because part of you, the part you've been trying to silence, knows exactly what's happening. Knows that you're complicit in your own erasure. Knows that every time you betray yourself to keep someone else happy, you're participating in a kind of violence against your own existence. But here's what keeps you locked in place: fear. The fear that if you stop performing, if you stop accommodating, if you stop being the version of yourself that everyone has come to rely on, you will be left alone. That the love you've received has been conditional all along, dependent on your willingness to disappear just enough to make room for others. That the moment you take up the space you actually need, the moment you speak the truth that's been clawing at your throat, the moment you set a boundary instead of dissolving yours to merge with theirs, everything will fall apart. And maybe it will. Maybe the relationships built on your self-abandonment cannot survive your self-recovery. Maybe the people who love the accommodating version of you will not recognize or accept the one who's decided to stop shrinking. Maybe choosing yourself means walking away from connections you thought were permanent, discovering they were only possible as long as you remained small. This is the threshold, and it's terrifying, because choosing yourself doesn't just mean disappointing others. It means confronting the identity you've built around being needed, being good, being the one who holds it all together. It means admitting that you've been hiding, that beneath the persona you've carefully constructed, there are parts of you that you've deemed unacceptable, the anger, the selfishness, the pettiness, the hunger, the darkness, and you've been working overtime to keep them buried. You've split yourself in two. The acceptable self you show the world, and the shadow self you've locked in the basement. But the shadow doesn't disappear just because you refuse to look at it. It grows stronger in the dark. It leaks out in passive aggression, in sudden irritability over small things, in the exhaustion that no amount of rest can cure. It whispers to you in the middle of the night that you're wasting your life. It shows up in dreams where you're screaming but no sound comes out, where you're running but your legs won't move. The parts of yourself you reject don't die. They wait. And here's what you eventually learn, if you're brave enough to turn around and face what you've been running from. Those rejected parts aren't the enemy. They're you. The anger you've suppressed is the part of you that knows your worth. The selfishness you've condemned is the part that wants to survive. The darkness you've feared is the part that holds your depth, your complexity, your realness. You cannot become whole by cutting yourself in half. Choosing yourself begins here, not in some grand declaration, not in a dramatic confrontation, but in the quiet, terrifying act of turning toward the parts of yourself you've been taught to exile. It begins when you stop asking, "How can I be more acceptable?" and start asking, "What have I been refusing to let myself be?" The turning point isn't comfortable. It doesn't arrive with clarity and confidence. It arrives with discomfort, with the sick feeling in your stomach when you say no for the first time and mean it, with the guilt that floods you when you prioritize your own needs over someone else's wants, with the anxiety that grips you when you speak a truth that might cost you approval. But here's the strange thing about discomfort in the service of truth. It feels different from the discomfort of self-betrayal. It's sharp instead of dull. It's present instead of numbing. It hurts, yes, but it hurts the way coming back to life hurts after your foot has fallen asleep. Painful, but proof of circulation returning. When you start choosing yourself, you start to notice things. You notice how much energy you were spending on managing other people's emotions. How much of your mental space was occupied by trying to predict what they needed, what they wanted, how they'd react. You notice the silence that opens up when you stop filling it with performance. And in that silence, at first, there's panic. Who am I if I'm not this? But if you can sit with the panic instead of running from it, something else emerges. A voice. Quiet at first because it's been buried so long. The voice that knows what you actually want, what you actually feel, what you actually need. It's been there all along, speaking beneath the noise of everyone else's expectations, but you couldn't hear it because you were too busy listening to the chorus of external demands. Choosing yourself means learning to trust that voice again. It means making decisions based on internal alignment rather than external approval. It means letting people be disappointed. It means watching relationships that were built on your self-erasure begin to crumble, and instead of rushing to repair them by shrinking again, letting them fall. Because what you're learning is this: the right people, the real connections, don't require your disappearance as the price of admission. The people who can hold your wholeness, shadow and all, are the ones worth keeping. Everyone else was only ever in love with a version of you that you had to kill yourself to maintain. This is where integration happens. Not as some spiritual concept, but as a lived reality. You stop dividing yourself into good parts and bad parts. You stop trying to be only light, only accommodating, only easy. You allow yourself to be difficult, to be inconsistent, to contain contradictions. You let the anger rise without condemning it. You let the desire surface without shame. You make space for the parts of yourself that don't fit neatly into anyone's idea of who you should be. And what you discover is that your strength was never in your ability to be palatable. Your strength is in your totality. The darkness you feared wasn't weakness, it was depth. The selfishness you rejected wasn't greed, it was self-preservation. The anger you suppressed wasn't bitterness, it was boundaries trying to form. When you integrate the shadow, you become grounded in a way that no amount of people-pleasing ever achieved. Because you're no longer standing on the shaky foundation of external validation. You're standing on the solid ground of self-knowledge. You know what you're capable of, the good and the bad. You know your edges. You know your limits. And that knowledge makes you unmovable in a way that politeness never could. People will notice the change. They'll say you've become harder, more selfish, less giving. And they're not entirely wrong. You have become less willing to give yourself away. But what they're really responding to is that you're no longer available for the old dynamic. You're no longer willing to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. Some will adjust. They'll learn to meet you where you actually are instead of where they wanted you to be. These relationships will deepen in ways you didn't know were possible because for the first time, there's actually you in them. Others won't adjust. They'll pull away, confused or hurt or angry that you've changed the rules without their permission. And this will hurt. Not because you made the wrong choice, but because loss always hurts, even when it's necessary. You will grieve these relationships. You will question yourself. You will wonder if you've made a terrible mistake. But underneath the doubt, if you're honest, there will be something else. Relief. Relief that you no longer have to perform. Relief that you can finally breathe at your full capacity. Relief that you're learning to distinguish between loneliness and solitude, between connection and enmeshment, between love and the performance of love. What changes when you choose yourself isn't that life becomes easier. It doesn't. If anything, it becomes more complex because you're no longer numbing yourself to avoid discomfort. You're feeling everything, the good, the bad, the uncertain. You're making harder choices because you're actually consulting yourself instead of just doing what's expected. But it becomes real. The relationships that remain are real. The work you do is real. The person you're becoming is real. You're no longer living a pantomime of someone else's idea of a good life. You're living your life with all its mess and strangeness and particular beauty. Boundaries stop feeling like acts of cruelty and start feeling like acts of clarity. You say no without the 3-paragraph explanation. You say yes only when you mean it. You stop volunteering for martyrdom and start asking for what you need. And when people can't meet you there, you let them go with sadness but without collapsing back into who you were to keep them. The chaos around you might not decrease, but your relationship to it changes. You stop taking on everyone's emotional weather. You stop trying to fix what isn't yours to fix. You learn the difference between empathy and absorption, between supporting someone and disappearing into their problems. There's a peace that comes with this, but it's not the peace of resolution. It's the peace of acceptance. Accepting that you are who you are. Accepting that some people will never understand. Accepting that choosing yourself is not a one-time decision but a daily practice of small reclamations. This boundary, this truth, this moment of honoring what you actually feel instead of what you think you should feel. You stop seeking external validation because you're learning to validate yourself. Not in the shallow way of affirmations, but in the deep way of keeping promises to yourself. Of following through. Of treating your own needs with the same seriousness you've always treated everyone else's. And slowly, so slowly you almost don't notice, the hollow space inside begins to fill. Not with certainty, not with confidence, but with presence. With the strange, unfamiliar experience of actually inhabiting your own life instead of watching it from a distance. With the quiet knowledge that you are no longer abandoning yourself to make room for others. Choosing yourself is not a destination. It's a direction, a reorientation, a decision you make again and again every time you're faced with the old pattern of self-betrayal. And some days you'll choose yourself and some days you'll fall back into old habits, and that's part of the process too. You're not trying to be perfect. You're trying to be honest. There will be moments when you question everything. When the loneliness feels unbearable. When you wonder if it wouldn't have been easier to just keep pretending. And in those moments, you'll have to remember, easier for whom? Easier at what cost? A cost you were paying with your life force, your authenticity, your soul. No relationship, no approval, no external validation is worth that price. You came into this world as yourself, singular and unrepeatable. And somewhere along the way, you learned to apologize for that. To sand down your edges. To translate yourself into something more digestible. But the work of a lifetime is to stop apologizing. To stop translating. To become, slowly and imperfectly, the person you were before the world taught you to be someone else. This is what happens when you finally choose yourself above all else. Not that everything falls into place, but that you do. The fragmented pieces of yourself that you scattered to please others, to fit in, to be loved, they begin to come home. And in their return, you discover something you'd almost forgotten. That you were never meant to be easy to understand or simple to categorize or convenient to love. You were meant to be whole. And wholeness is not gentle. It's not polite. It doesn't ask permission. It simply is, in all its contradictory, complicated human glory. So when the moment comes, and it will come quietly in the middle of some ordinary day, when you have to choose between yourself and someone else's comfort, between your truth and their expectation, between who you are and who they need you to be, choose yourself. Not because it's easy, not because it guarantees anything, but because you are the only person who will be with you for every moment of your existence, and you deserve your own allegiance. You deserve to be more than an echo of everyone else's desires. You deserve to take up space, to speak, to refuse, to want, to be difficult and strange in exactly who you are. Life will not reward you for choosing yourself. There is no prize, no recognition, no moment when the world acknowledges your courage. But you will sleep better. You will breathe deeper. You will look in the mirror and recognize the person staring back. And on the quiet nights when you're alone with yourself, there will be no more hollow space, no more stranger behind your eyes. Just you, whole, flawed, real, and finally your own.